As we know, exactly 100 years ago today was the storm of 1919, and that's the focus of our program today. Mr. Norville Jackson is here to talk about what happened 100 years ago. Some of his family members are here. They look quite young to be related, and I believe some of his former students, perhaps even current students, are here, so welcome. Veronica Camille is taking photos. Ty Husak is doing the video work today, like he does for every program. And Ty has also brought us into the social media world. So if you had a chance to pick up a little bookmark out there, if you just put in Aransas County Historical Society on Facebook, you can find our page. We also have a web page and a YouTube channel. So I want to thank them. Chandler from the Fulton Mansion brought us some remnants from the windmill blades that got stuck in the tree right behind the Fulton Mansion. There's two good information pieces out there about that. That's also from the storm of 1919. I want to give a special thanks to David Murrah for putting this program together, and he's a former president, and he does our publicity and our newsletter that you get, and he did a lot of this work while he was on a long vacation, so we appreciate him doing that, and we're happy he came back home. So without further ado, I'll introduce David Murrah. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Actually, I did most of the work this week. I'm too busy shopping in Santa Fe. Can you feel it? Those of you who were here through Hurricane Harvey might know what I'm talking about. But 100 years ago today, at this very moment, this building would have started to shake with the arrival of the storm of 1919. And that's what we're here to talk about today. For better or worse, history has proven that hurricanes are a major factor in the shaping of the functions and the economy of Texas coastal communities. The first recorded hurricane in Texas history struck Galveston Island in 1527, destroying a Spanish fleet and killing nearly 200. In the past 200 years, there have been at least 89 hurricanes to strike the shores of Texas. That's an average of one nearly every other year, 45 before 1919 and 44 since 1919. In the 100 years prior to 1919, there were 45 hurricanes that hit Texas. The deadliest, the Galveston storm of 1900, claimed from 6,000 to 8,000 lives, making it the worst natural disaster in American history. While not as catastrophic, hurricanes in our part of the state prior to 1919 had far-reaching impact. For example, hurricanes in 1875 and again in 1886 eliminated Indianola on Matagorda Bay as the major port for this area. In the late 1840s, Indianola had become the gateway to the south and western Texas as the chief port through which European and American immigrants flowed. Nearly all of the German communities, Fredericksburg and others, came through Indianola. And it was the terminus, Indianola was the terminus of the Chihuahua Trail, which carried more freight than did its most famous rival, the Santa Fe Trail. But all of that ended, for the most part, in September 1875, when Indianola was destroyed by a hurricane with extensive loss of life. The city tried to rebuild, but alas, in 1886, another storm on August the 20th flattened it, only to be followed by a fire. By 1887, Indianola was completely gone. But the destruction of Indianola also contributed to new economic development for Aransas County and the coastal bend. In part, the storm created new interest in a new rail line, which was under construction by that time to connect San Antonio and Aransas Bay, where a deep water port was planned. Then in 1888, the Aransas Pass Improvement Company was formed, and it announced plans to dredge a navigable channel to the Gulf, and the new San Antonio Aransas Pass Railroad then followed up by building a branch line to Rockport. As you can see, it was anticipated that Rockport was going to be the focus of the new ship channel. The arrival of the railroad quickly launched a bustling tourist industry, and the era of grand hotels along the bayshore appeared in Rockport. Well, with the railroad and grand hope for a construction of a deep water port, Rockport seemed destined to become the shining star of the coastal bend. And with the outbreak of World War I and the development of the shipbuilding industry, Rockport continued to boom. However, in August 1916, Rockport's bustling economy was jostled somewhat by a hurricane that hit 90 miles to the south of us at Baffin Bay. And while the city suffered some damage, it quickly bounced back, although it washed up some boats in the middle of town. Well, in the last 3 issues of the Aransas County Historical Society newsletter, Janie White, who helped with this program, wrote about Rockport in 1919 to set the stage for this program. And here's some of the highlights from those articles. She said in 1919, tourism was thriving. The San Antonio and Aransas Pass Railroad was offering low rates to Rockport, and the hotels were crowded with tourists who came to fish and for tarpon. The La Playa Hotel was advertising on, quote, rooms en suite with hot and cold water in every room. Moreover, Rockport was experiencing a population boom because of shipbuilding. At the start of the war, the Hellenfels brothers at Corpus Christi signed a contract with the Emergency Fleet Corporation to establish a shipyard that would employ 660 men, which then in turn caused the population of Rockport to increase from about 600 to 3,000. Well, even though the war ended in November 1918, the company continued to work to complete its contract with the 4 wooden hull ships. And on July 31st, 1919, the company launched with much fanfare the first of its 4 ships, the Baychester. The San Antonio paper reported that a crowd of 7,000 came to watch as Mrs. F.W. Hellenfels christened the ship. And then on September the 10th, 1919, a second ship, the Zanaga, was launched with Mrs. C.A. Hellenfels as the sponsor. And the San Antonio paper reported that the big ship glided down the waves as graceful as a swan. But on the same day, September 10, 1919, a growing storm entered the Gulf of Mexico after crossing Florida. On September the 11th, the Weather Bureau then issued a warning for the upper Texas coast from Port Arthur down to Velasco, and Velasco is at the mouth of the Brazos, 100 miles northeast of us. Well, to tell you what happened next, let me introduce you to an eyewitness of those events. Today, we're glad to have with us Mr. E.H. Norville, who moved here with his wife Irene in 1888, the same year that the railroad arrived. Mr. Norville, come in and you tell us more about yourself.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to my home, which my wife and I have affectionately named Aransas, the breath of the sea. My name is Elisha Huntley Norville, but most of my friends call me by my initials E.H. Everyone, that is, except my wife. My beloved breath of my life. She usually addresses me as Mr. Norville. Our daughter, an only child, whom we also named Irene because she was the absolute mirror image of my wife in every respect, beauty, style, and grace. She married a local man from Rockport named Stephen Ford Jackson, who was in the wholesale fish dealership at that time. And they got married and built a home on 801 North Magnolia. And in 1915, our first grandchild, Norville Ford Jackson, was born. And with the subsequent birth of 4 other grandchildren, my wife and I forever became known as Nana and Dana. And now, let me tell you a little bit about how my wife and I came to be in Rockport, and how we acquired this quaint but beautiful little cottage on Water Street. My wife and I had been raised and educated in our home state of Virginia. And the year following our marriage, in 1885, Irene and I were both hired to teach at the Goliad Male and Female College in Goliad, Texas. I as a principal and a teacher in the primary department, and Irene taught instrumental and vocal music as well as painting and drawing. While there, we made a trip across the bay to a newly incorporated city called Rockport. Well, needless to say, we absolutely fell in love with this beautiful gem of the Texas coast. And we knew that our future was here. In 1888, we moved to Rockport, and I decided to capitalize on the real estate boom as an agent in the area, buying and selling land and property. I was also an active promoter of the San Antonio Rangers Pass Railroad line, the first railroad in Rockport. In 1890, we were able to purchase this home of our dreams overlooking Aransas Bay. But owning this home was a daunting responsibility, as its previous owners were some of the most prominent citizens and pioneers of the area and the state. The original owner was John W. Baylor, a native of Refugio, who served as, in 1836, he served as an army surgeon during the Battle of San Jacinto. And he even helped remove a musket ball from the ankle of General Houston himself. And following the war, he resumed his medical practice in Refugio. But in 1868, he was called to help promote the building of a new railroad line in Rockport and to manage his newly purchased meatpacking plant in South Rockport. He bought this property on Water Street and erected this small early American cypress cottage with a modified Greek Revival style front porch. Baylor then sold his home in 1876 to T.P. McCampbell, also a native of Refugio, for the outrageous sum of $1,000. My heart. Also, from Refugio, McCampbell was famous in his own to promote a new and manage his newly purchased meatpacking plant in South Rockport. He bought this property on Water Street and erected this small early American cypress cottage with a modified Greek Revival style front porch. Baylor sold his home in 1876 to T.P. McCampbell for $1,000, and he was famous in his own right. He had served in the 8th Texas Cavalry, the famous Texas Ranger unit of the Confederate Army during the Civil War. They were called Terry's Texas Rangers. McCampbell and his brother then came back home and established a ranching empire, acquired over 40,000 acres of land spread over 3 counties. In Rockport, McCampbell was also involved in the banking business, land development and politics, In 1880, he was elected judge of Aransas County. In 1890, I decided to bite the bullet and purchase this home from Mr. McCampbell. And this time I had to pay $2,000. Oh, the evils of inflation. But it was worth every penny. Well, this has been our home for over 40 years. And the memories we made there are absolutely priceless. The greatest of which was the birth of our daughter, Irene, in 1891. Yes, there were many joyous, happy times, but there were also sad, tragic times too. But probably the most terrifying memory was of our narrow escape from this very house during the great hurricane of 1919. Now, we knew that there was a hurricane out in the Gulf headed this way. Newspapers had even called it the worst hurricane in history. But we were told that it would land far enough north of us that all we would get is a good rain and maybe some moderately strong winds. No one took it very seriously. But on that fateful Sunday morning, September 14th, 1919, my wife was sitting up in bed, listening to the rain and the wind pounding on the walls. And then she realized that there would probably be no Sunday school or church that morning. She was a Sunday school teacher. She also played the piano at the First Presbyterian Church on Market Street. And she didn't think anybody would be braving that storm to go to church that day. But I got dressed as fast as I could, and I went outside to assess the situation. And I came back and I immediately announced to my wife that I was appalled at the condition of the sea. Well, she had to look for herself, of course. And she said, "My horrors, Mr. Norville, the bay is in our front yard." She said, "We have to leave right now. I am not staying one more second in this house." And he says, "Oh, don't be a quitter. You can do it. Get my breakfast ready. And then I will go find a car so I can get you to our daughter's house safely." And she quickly made breakfast. And it was undercooked. But I ate it greedily. I wasn't about to say it. But my wife couldn't eat. She was too nervous. And then when I was through, I said that I was going to go get a car. And I was going to check on the elderly Lightburn sisters who lived in the lot behind us. So while I left, my wife said that a window broke in the living room. And the shutters had been blown open. So my wife, all by herself, managed to pull those shutters back in and secure them tightly. She then started covering her piano with many blankets. And she started gathering silver and valuables that she could take with her. And then I arrived, absolutely soaking wet. And I announced to my wife that there was no car to be found. And the water was so high, no car could make it through. And he says, "Walking is out of the question." I almost was bent over double when I was walking into the wind. I don't know what we're going to do. And then my wife said, "Well, what about our horse, old Dick? We can mount him." So we mounted the horse. Now my wife sat behind me, riding man fashion, because that's the only way she could stay on the horse. And then we left into the storm. And we passed the house of the Morrises family. And Mrs. Morris had a daughter who was a music student of Mrs. Norville. And she looked at Mrs. Norville and she said, "Mama, come here and look at this. Mrs. Norville is riding a horse like a man." And the mother knew right then. She understood the gravity of the situation. Because if Mrs. Norville, the quintessential lady of Rockport, the epitome of prim and proper, if she had to resort to running a horse like a man, you knew it was bad. And Mrs. Morris asked if she could bring her children, and he could help find them a same place for them. So we got a rope and we tied the children behind the horse in a line so they wouldn't get separated. And we headed out west, and we made it 2 blocks to Austin Street, and those children were so hysterical. Some of them were bruised and battered because they had fallen, and they were terrified. So I then found a way into one of the 2-story buildings of downtown, and they took refuge there. My wife and I then continued on our journey, but little did we know that it was going to take us more than 2 hours to travel those 6 blocks. The wind was blowing so hard that it drove needle-like shafts of rain into our exposed flesh, drawing blood. We had to keep our eyes closed as much as we could because it was too painful. The wind blew most of our clothes off our backs. And occasionally, a gust of wind would hit old Dick, and he'd be thrown across the road. But somehow we managed to hold on. Then he would be hit with a gust of wind in his face, and we would spin like a top, but we still managed to hold on. And when we finally got to Magnolia Street was practically underwater. And that was about 9 feet above sea level. I quickly deposited my wife in the careful hands of our daughter, but I had to go back. I had to check on the Lightburn sisters. So I got back on Old Dick, and I went to the house behind ours, and I found the Lightburn sisters nestled under blankets, hiding in a closet, crying. I implored them to go with me, but they refused. "This is our home. We don't want to leave." And finally, we made a deal with them. They said, if you would say a prayer for us and read a scripture, then I think we will be protected. So I picked 2 of the shortest scriptures I knew. And I said the quickest prayer that I ever said in my life. But I was able to get them safely ensconced into a safe place. And then I went back to the house on Magnolia Street. The water by this time was already in the yard. I helped my son-in-law, Ford, nail bed slats across the picture window in the front. And then, as the water was still rising, we made the decision that the smart thing to do was to evacuate the house to a more secure place. And as we were making preparations to do that, my little grandson, 4-year-old Norville, was on the front porch, jumping up and down and clapping. Yay! Yay! The fitch tree is gone! The fitch tree is gone! He was saying, the switch tree is gone. Well, that is the tree that my daughter used when there was a naughty little boy that needed correction. We decided to go to the 2-room schoolhouse on the corner of Live Oak and Orleans. Many families had taken refuge there. I took the 2 young boys, Norville and his younger brother, Jim Bart. I took them with me and Old Dick. My son-in-law, Ford, carried the baby, 9-month-old Isabel, with a wooden bucket over her head. And the others walked on foot. And we trudged on, plodded through the wind and the rain. But before we got halfway there, we saw someone riding up on horseback. Well, it was Mr. Frank Sparks, who was also a survivor and hero of the Battle of San Jacinto. And he came to announce, he says, "You must turn back. The school is no longer safe. The walls are falling down." But we could see people leaving the gym, leaving the high school, and going across Orleans Street to the Ertling House, which later became the Harper House. And that's where we went to. And we were there through the night. We had to rise to the second story because water was filling most of the first. And we just waited it out. The next morning, the waters receded. And we were able to make it back to the house on Magnolia Street. Water had reached in there, but it wasn't devastating. But since the city was under martial law, we had to wait 4 days before we could go back to our home on Water Street. And we couldn't even get close enough to see. Now, our house had 2 chimneys. We thought we should be able to see those. We didn't. We kind of were prepared for the worst. There were big, beautiful 2-story homes that were gone. But we didn't know whether we had any hope for ours to be still standing. But on the 4th day, we made the trip down to the Water Street. And lo and behold, there it was. Now, the fences were gone. And the yard was a sight to behold. The 2 chimneys had been sheared away by the wind at the roof line. And there was structural damage to the front porch. But the amazing thing that stacked in front of the house was a mountain of debris. Well, it's that debris that probably saved our house from destruction. I counted over 6 fishing boats, one of them in our front door. We found hundreds of timbers from the Bailey Pavilion that had been built over the water. Underneath the timbers was the very piano that my wife played almost nightly in the Bailey Pavilion. But the worst thing were the dead cattle. Dead, rotting cattle had washed ashore from St. Joe Island. But we managed to clean up and we saved the house. And it turned out that our house and 2 others were the only ones remaining standing after the storm. Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for sheltering and protecting my family and friends. Not a day goes by that I don't pray for the families who lost so much more than we did. And not a day goes by that I don't thank God for my home, and which became the home of many families since ours. And it will always and forever be Aransas, the breath of the sea. Now, I do believe I hear my wife. And I know what that means. That means she has a long list of honeydews. But I know how to soften her up. I sing to her. Guess what her favorite song is? Irene. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams.
Thank you. you, Mr. Norville, for coming and sharing your memories with us today. We're so happy that you and your family survived the hurricane and the descendants are here today. Well, just as the Norvilles took refuge in what became Judge Harper's home, others scrambled to ride out the storm in other substantial buildings, including the Shell Creek Aransas County Courthouse and the venerable Fulton Mansion. And still another place was the home of Leopold and Clara Brock. Well, here now to share some stories about how that home saved lives is another reenactment by a great actor who is going to portray Rusty Day, the owner of the Angel Rose, Mr. Rusty Day.
Thank you, Dave. There are lots of stories that are told about this home. Some of them are documented. Quite a few of them are told by Mr. Jackson back there, the historic recreations. The stories that I've been told and that I've read describe the Brock family as deciding that their home was a very substantial home in Rockport at the time. I can attest to that. I've been pulling walls and looking at stuff, and it's built really strong. But they decided to stay during the storm. And one of the things that they decided that their home could take other people. And so Clara decided that she would put a light in one of the upper floor windows in case someone needed a place to go. They could see the light and would know that that place was standing and would come there for refuge. We honor that today. We burn a light in the attic at night to honor their choice to open their home to the victims of the hurricane. I've been told repeatedly about the 9-foot level of water, and our home is about 2 feet above the grade, and we have 12-foot ceilings on the first floor. The story goes that at some point they were pulling people in from the second floor balcony. A number has been thrown around repeatedly. Between 200 and 300 people eventually sought refuge in our home. And the Brocks were so gracious in what they did. And what I want to tell you a little bit today about it is what we're doing to the home. And I'm going to start by telling you the story of the folks who bought the home as it was in the process of being demolished by the city. In 1979, the Fishers, Cluis and Marilyn Fisher, bought the home, and Marilyn said they moved into it, and for the first 2 years it was like camping. It was in pretty bad shape. They closed off most of the rooms except for rooms they absolutely had to have, and then they would restore one room at a time until everything was done inside, and then they started on the outside. By 2004, and they weren't wealthy people. They were prosperous people, but they weren't wealthy. It took them a long time to do the restoration. But by 2004, they were ready to open it as a bed and breakfast. In 2005, Cluis fell and injured his back and passed away shortly thereafter. And Marilyn continued to run it as a bed and breakfast until we bought it from her in 2008. Currently, we are closed as a bed and breakfast while we do some restoration on the outside. Some of the, if you'll look, this is the only remaining part of the second floor balcony roof, and Hurricane Harvey took that down for us. But we are in the process now of putting the roof back over the second floor balcony and doing some major restoration on the outside of the house. And then we've already begun shoring up the foundation, and we're going to put a high-efficiency air conditioner in the home. But she's a survivor. She's probably going to be here a long time after we're gone, but we're honored to be able to own her for a period of time. And we hope that she'll be here a long time after we're gone. Thank you.
No, he makes a point about survivors, and we've seen on the Norville house, I know the Sorensen house went through those 2 hurricanes. Maybe we ought to start a program of marking houses that are survivors of both the 1919 storm as well as Harvey. There are a number, probably more than you think, in this community, and thank goodness. These old houses stood up and became points of refuge even during Hurricane Harvey. Well, before we conclude, let's just take a minute to analyze the impact of the 1919 hurricane. As you can see from this recreated track of the storm, the hurricane was originally en route to Louisiana, as Mr. Norville alluded. But you can see that where I've circled there, it veered slightly to the west and made landfall just south of Corpus Christi. By that time, it was a Category 4 storm, killing nearly 1,000 people, destroying most of those in the Corpus Christi area. It destroyed 10 major ships. It caused millions of dollars in damage. While Corpus Christi suffered the brunt of the storm, much of Rockport and Aransas Pass were also destroyed. And as Mr. Norville alluded, a 10-foot tidal surge decimated downtown Rockport, wrecking the La Playa Inn, the Bayside Inn, which was down on South Water Street, Bailey's Pavilion, which was out in the harbor, we saw a picture of it earlier, as well as other landmarks. In Rockport, either 8 or 11 lives were lost. Sources say different things, but perhaps as many as 11 people were killed in Rockport, including 5 who drowned when their boat capsized on Austin Street. Well, the storm also had long-term economic effects on Aransas County, just as the 1886 hurricane did. For example, it virtually destroyed the county's chance to get the long-coveted deepwater port that it wanted to be. Because in spite of the destruction and damage at Corpus Christi, swift political movements by its supporters, Corpus supporters, secured for that city the coveted deepwater port. Because in September 1922, Congress authorized construction of a 21-mile ship channel from the Aransas Pass to Corpus Christi, the present ship channel. Also, the hurricane completely destroyed Rockport's beach hotels. Wealthy tourists no longer would come by train for extended summer stays. And so once again, the community in the early 1920s reverted back to its standby economy, a place for fishing and hunting. However, as automobiles came into popular use in the 1920s, county leaders, especially Judge Joe Harper, the same Harper in whose home the Norvilles took refuge, he convinced its residents to pass, I believe in 1926, a bond issue which eventually led to the construction of the Copano Bay Bridge and then ultimately the building of the Hug the Coast Highway, which connected Rockport with Houston. So by the late 1920s, Rockport was taking on its new image and that of a new kind of tourism appealing to automobiles, and tourist courts were taking the place of the beach hotels, and our modern tourist industry was launched. So now maybe in conclusion, we should ask ourselves this question. Had we gotten the deepwater port, had the hurricane of 1919 not occurred, and we had gotten the deepwater port, would you rather be living adjacent to the deepwater port with its pollution of refineries and chemical plants, or would you rather be living adjacent to winter Texans whose worst sin is blocking the aisles at Walmart? Maybe the 1919 storm saved us from an uncertain future. Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. Mr. Robert Jackson. Thank you very much, Bobby, for great performance. And Rusty, thank you, and Jennifer, for your help with this very much. I know there are other memories of this storm. I wish we had time to share them, but many of you have been here a long time. I assume we might have refreshments left. Cheryl, anything else you want to, where are you?
I'm back here. I just want to say for some of the people that didn't get to see it completely, it will be posted in a few days for you to watch it as a video and from home.
It said, check our website, Aransas County Historical Society.org. The video will be there, and tell your friends that it will be posted. I can tell you, I counted at least 150-something people here, by far the biggest crowd we've ever had for one of our events. And we thank very much the museum for co-sponsoring this event. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for remembering those who went through the 1919 hurricane. Thank you.